Hi friends, I'm Kyla and welcome back to the Infinite Library. Today I'm going to be doing my September wrap-up, going over all the books that I read over the month of September. So let's get the stats out of the way first. So I didn't read quite as much in September as I did in August. I'm actually okay with that because I was looking for a bit more of a relaxed month after the very intense month of Magical Readathon in August. So I was just more about reading kind of what I felt like, getting through a couple of library books. Also aware that I'm probably going to be reading a lot in October because I want to get to all my spooky books. So I only read a total of 9 books this month, but I'm pretty happy with what I did read and I had a decent time with a lot of them. So of those 9 books, I read 2 manga, 1 webcomic, I read a YA fantasy, an adult contemporary, 2 horror, and a biography. It's quite a varied month in what I read. So to break down by format that I read those in, I read, of those 9 books, I read 8 of those physically and 1 digitally. 3 of those were from my TBR, 1 of those was online, and then the remaining 5 of those were library books. So I did manage to mostly read library books this month, with a couple of others thrown on as well. Rating wise, it wasn't the best in terms of ratings. I did get 1 5-star this month. The remaining books were 3 4-stars. I had 5 3-star books, although some of those were high 3s, as you'll see as I go over the wrap-up. But it was a mid kind of month really in terms of the books I read, but I didn't necessarily hate any of them, so I'm not too upset about it. So all in all, that was an average rating for this month of 3.78. Weirdly higher than the previous month, as that was 3.6, but I think I just read a lot more. And I had more 2s that month, so not the worst. So to begin, I started off the month with a manga. And it was a manga that I've heard people talk about a lot, and it's kind of been on my TBR for a while, and I was in the mood to read some BL this month. So I finally got to the first volume of Dick Fight Island. I'm probably just going to call it Weenie Fight Island going forward because it makes me laugh to call it that instead of its actual name. I don't know what I can really say about this one. I actually really enjoyed it unexpectedly. It was pretty much as lewd as you were expecting from the cover. I was actually surprised that there was still a lot of things going on that I really enjoyed. I liked the characters a lot. There was a surprising amount of emotion and romance for a book that I really was just thought wasn't going to have a lot going for it, honestly. So I didn't expect to like this anywhere near as much as I did, but it was really fun. So essentially it is about a bunch of islands, and there is a tournament that happens every 3 years, I believe, and each kind of island picks a warrior to represent their island, and whoever wins becomes the new king of the islands. They essentially battle pretty much as it says. The idea is that whoever wins is the person who makes the other one. But I did genuinely enjoy this, which was very unexpected, and I then picked up the second volume later on in the month because I had such a good time with it. So yeah, I have nothing else to complain about really with it. It was a good time. Okay, the next book that I read was entirely different in terms of tone. It was a library book and I don't currently have the copy, so I'm just going to put a picture of it over here or something. And that was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. So it's an adult contemporary book, which again, it's one that I've been hearing a lot about, and it's kind of a literary dark fiction. And I kind of went into it not really thinking I didn't really know if it was going to be my kind of thing, but I was just intrigued, honestly. I didn't hugely enjoy this one, to be honest. I think I gave it a 3, but it was a very mid book for me. So essentially, it is about a rich white woman in America who is just really depressed, and to sort of get away from her life, she just wants to sleep away the whole year, which she does with a combination of various drugs and medication. So it's a very internal book. It's mostly just you're kind of in her head for the whole time. There are a few other characters, but none of them really seem to be massively important, and she honestly just treats them all like crap. She's not a very nice person, and I think that's kind of supposed to be the point. It's obviously a bit of a social commentary kind of thing, but it just didn't really work for me. It's like I found it compulsive to read. Like I think I finished it in like a few days or something, but it just wasn't really for me. I found it a very claustrophobic read. I found it very depressing, which was the point. And I just couldn't really relate to the protagonist, I suppose. And I get what the author was going for, and I think she did an alright job, but it just didn't really work for me. I just found it, yeah, very. I read a little bit like a fever dream, honestly. I found it quite an anxiety inducing read. I found it quite scary to read, and not in like the good way of scary. It was just very uncomfortable to read, basically. So I didn't really love that one at all. I think I read it, and it's probably not one I'm ever going to go back to or even think all that much about. So it was good enough in terms of writing to give it a 3-star, but I don't think it's something that I would ever recommend to people. So that was that book. Next, I went with another library book. This was by someone who I really love as an author, though, so I was kind of going for like a more familiar book for me, even though the stories she writes are also horror. So I read Life Ceremony by Sayaka Murata, which is an anthology of short stories. And each story is, a lot of what she writes is kind of contemporary, like social commentaries of Japanese women. And they always get a little bit weird. They always delve into kind of really unusual topics and examining and sort of pulling apart the stereotypes of what women, and what Japanese women in particular, are kind of expected to be in society. So this was a bunch of different short stories collected together, and they were kind of all in the horror sci-fi sort of realm. And I really enjoyed that one. I think overall I gave it a 4-star. It didn't quite hit the 5-star, but I enjoyed pretty much all the stories in some kind of way. Some of them were very short as well. I'll briefly go over each story just so you can kind of see which ones I liked the best out of it. So I've read 2 other books already by Sayaka Murata. I initially read Earthlings, which I really enjoyed. Did not see the ending coming, and it really threw me, and I loved it. And then I also read Convenience Store Woman, which I didn't like quite as much as Earthlings, but I still really enjoyed it. And I'd sort of rate this anthology as about the same kind of enjoyment level as Convenience Store Woman, maybe a little bit lower just because some of the stories didn't necessarily hit for me. So, of the stories I read, I think I had one 5 out of 5, which was a story called Puzzle. And then there was a bunch of other stories that I still enjoyed quite a lot. So there was A First Rate Material, which was a 4, A Magnificent Spread, which I believe was all about people sort of sharing food and the joining of families. There was The Time of the Large Star, which was about people who only sort of go out when it's dark, and then this girl who's like fine to go out in the daytime. Life Ceremony, I gave a 4 out of 5, which was this really weird sort of story all about, it's almost like cult-like practice in Japan about coming together to create children. There's not really like relationships as such, but essentially whenever someone dies, they kind of take all the parts of the body and have this weird wake ceremony that then turns into basically people pairing off to try and procreate, which is really interesting, honestly. Body Magic was a 4 out of 5 for me. I really enjoyed that one. It was all about identity and sexuality. And then I think the other ones I rated were 3 out of 5s. Mostly a lot of these were quite short and there just wasn't a lot to them. So A Summer Night's Kiss was just kind of cute. It was a 3 out of 5. Two's Family, a 3 out of 5. Poochie was a weird one about these two girls that are kind of looking after a salaryman like he's a pet. That was a bit too odd for me. And then Lover on the Breeze was about a curtain who was in love with the girl in her room, and she was a curtain, and then she had a boyfriend, and then there was a weird three-way thing that happened with that. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Technically an average rating of like a high 3, but I had, I enjoyed it enough that I would just call it a 4, honestly, for me. So if you're kind of into weird short stories, I'd really recommend Life Ceremony because I had a good time with it. The next thing I read this month was a biography. I read Elliot Page's Pageboy, which I didn't love it, I've got to say. I think I gave it a 3-star. Not because it was bad, like, I wasn't necessarily ever bored reading it, and I appreciated some of the things that were being sort of talked about by Elliot. It was very unflinching and honest throughout. I appreciate that Elliot basically was completely admitting all their bad points, all the times when they'd messed up, when they didn't deal with things well. So I really appreciated that. I appreciated them looking at the struggle with realizing their transness later in life, which is something I can definitely relate to. But I had some issues with the writing, I think, was my real thing. Like, I found some of the chronology, I think other people have mentioned this, it was kind of paced a little bit weird. It would go back and forth a lot in time, and I sort of was alright with that at the beginning, and then it would do it so many times, and I was just more invested in what was happening sometimes in the future kind of stuff, and not going back to the childhood all over again. I also found it a bit of an uncomfortable read, and I would kind of preface that to anyone who wants to read it. It does deal with the kind of topics that they are what they are. It is at times a very depressing book. It can be a very uncomfortable book to read at times, and I would bear that in mind going into it. I think as well, it also just felt a little bit like it was unfinished at the end. There were a lot of like, part of the chronology was all over the place. There were a lot of plot threads that were just kind of left dangling, so we'd kind of hear about something and we'd think it's going somewhere, and then it never really did. And I know part of that is because this is a person who is still young, honestly, and I was kind of surprised they were releasing a memoir when they're not really that old, because there's probably still so much more they can talk about in the future. And maybe they will write another book which will kind of be a continuation of this. But I think it just didn't feel complete or finished. And I think for that, really, as well as the writing style that maybe wasn't amazing, is what made it free for me. I appreciated what Elliot was saying. There was such a good portrayal of society and the media's pressures on someone who just doesn't fit into that, normal little square box of what a person should be. But yeah, it just didn't necessarily work fully for me. So I'd say I would recommend it if you're interested to know more about what Elliot Page went through. There was a lot I never knew about. I also want to watch more of their movies now because I've only watched a couple of them apparently. Mostly Umbrella Academy is what I know him from. But I think for me, the memoir was just kind of alright. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand with that. After that, I wanted something a bit lighter, so I went and picked up the second volume of Weenie Fight Island. And yeah, I just had a good time with it again. I wasn't really expecting too much. The first volume does actually kind of conclude things nicely, and this volume definitely shows that, because it is very much just kind of like a love letter to the first volume. It feels a little bit like it's an epilogue. It's set after the tournament with a few things set before it as well, and it's just kind of carrying on the different characters' relationships. and how that goes, but the actual tournament is kind of just done and dusted in this. So I don't know if the series is continuing. I kind of got the feeling it was maybe going to end here at 2 volumes, but it might still continue because I think it has been reasonably popular. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked the characters a lot, and I didn't really have much complaints, and I was kind of okay with this just being a fan service volume, essentially, that was just there to explore the characters and what they were doing after the events of the first volume. So it technically should be rated lower, but I just had such a good time with it that I would still kind of put this in the 4-star boundary, basically. So I'm not going to say any more about that one because spoilers, but yeah, I had a good time with it. I then finally got around to finishing my book that I did start last month, and then I had to go and take it back to the library because there was a reservation on it, and I managed to reserve it again and got it pretty fast. So I was able to finish How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I have a colourful history, I suppose, with Grady Hendrix's books. I find them to be hits or misses for me, and this one was somewhere in the middle, I would say. I think I would give it a high 3. It's not quite a 4-star for me, but I didn't dislike it. In terms of the ratings of the books, my best friend's exorcism is my favourite of his. That would be a 5-star. Then the Final Girl Support Group, then this one, and then at the bottom will be the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which I didn't really enjoy that much. So this book, I believe I probably talked about it in the next one, but basically is about these 2 siblings whose parents die suddenly and they are left with the house and all the things inside the house, which mostly is a massive collection of dolls and puppets that their mother has made like over the years of her life. And there is one puppet in particular that seems to be kind of malevolent and trying to stop them from selling the house, living their lives the way that they are. Yeah, I felt mixed about this one, I've got to say. I think when I started off, I didn't really like the characters that much, particularly the brother, but after some kind of chapters midway through that kind of explains a lot about what happened with the brother, with Mark, that was his name, I kind of understood him a lot more. And whilst I don't think I ever really liked Lauren and Mark hugely, I did understand them and I could relate to them in some ways. They behaved atrociously to each other for a whole lot of the book, but they did kind of develop more of a sibling relationship as it went on. And I really enjoyed the side characters, I've got to say. Like, there was a whole group of, like, other family members that kind of showed up, and someone else later on that sort of helped them with trying to exercise the puppet, and she was great. And they were probably my favourite parts in the book was when other characters were involved. I thought it had some decent scares. There was a lot of gory, gross stuff, which Grady always does very well. I could see it making a very good film, honestly, or a TV series even. Probably more a film, because I don't think the tension would stay for the whole TV series. And weirdly enough, this technically does play one of my phobias, because I really don't like dolls, that kind of thing. But I think not having visuals helped. So I was kind of like feeling how creepy it was, but it didn't necessarily scare me so much I had to stop reading. I didn't really have a whole lot else to say about that. It was kind of quite simple, I felt, in the end, in terms of what the book was about. Like, it had obviously the main horror story running through it, but there was a lot all about grief, about family bonds, and I think that's really what the book was about, rather than just the horror stuff. So yeah, it wasn't bad. I don't know if I would ever reread it, but it is one that I would probably, if I thought it would be someone's thing, would probably recommend to others. So yeah, I think I gave it a high 3 in the end. The next thing I read, I don't have a physical copy of it because it is a webcomic, and it was one I just kind of stumbled on, and I think after reading Weenie Fight Island, I was just kind of in the mood for a cute kind of BL, so I found this webcomic called Omega Complex, and essentially it is a manhwa It is one that is still publishing, but there's only so many chapters that can be found at the moment because I think it is getting a Western publication release coming up. So I didn't read everything that was out there. I read about 40 chapters or so and just kind of left it at a point that seemed a good point to leave it at in terms of the storyline. And I'll probably pick it up when it gets a Western release because I had a good time with it. So I'm not necessarily really into like Omega Alpha kind of worlds, but I didn't mind this one. It was about these two guys, Korean, I believe it is a manhwa, and they were childhood friends, and then basically issues happened which meant that they kind of drifted away from each other, and the main character was avoiding the other guy for quite a while because he was terrified essentially that he had manifested as a Omega, and his friend had manifested as an Alpha, which means they're kind of almost doomed to be kind of attracted to each other, but he didn't want to push that onto his friend because his friend had a massive complex about Omegas after having had bad experiences with them in the past. So rather than reveal that to his friend, he just kind of disappeared for a while. And of course they meet up again, and they're kind of trying to reevaluate their friendship after this sort of betrayal of him vanishing for a while. And it was very like slow burn sort of romance between them. It got a little bit smutty later on, but generally it was just this quite sweet romance between them. And yeah, it was fine. It wasn't anything that I would yell about. It's probably a high 3 for me, but I just found it very cute and very sweet, and yeah, I'll probably pick up more of it in the future. The second to last book I read was one that I've been anticipating for quite some time now, and it was Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuistion. So I went into this and the premise didn't really sell it to me, I've got to say. Like, it felt just kind of like a gimmick, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to gel with it, but I absolutely love this book. It was my 5-star of the month. I read the movie basically straight away afterwards, which I didn't love as much. It was a mid-movie, I suppose, but I didn't hate it. I really, really enjoyed this one. It destroyed me, essentially. The latter half, particularly, when shit hit the fan, was what made this into a 5-star for me. Like, the initial half was just this kind of cute interaction between the two characters, with them getting into a relationship, and then things got real. And I really appreciated all the politics that was brought into this. And unexpectedly, I think what really got me was some of the discussion based around grief, which I was not expecting to come out of this book. But it really hit me quite hard. I don't really tab books that much, but I even had to tab some things because they were bits that just absolutely made me bawl. So I actually just wanted to read something from Red, White and Royal Blue. I tabbed a couple of things which really hit me, but this one I thought I just wanted to share with you all, basically, because it really got me. So there's not any spoilers for it, but it's just this very sort of honest conversation that someone has with Alex, the main character. So imagine, we're all born with a set of feelings. Some are broader or deeper than others, but for everyone, there's that ground floor, a bottom crust of the pie. That's the maximum depth of feeling you've ever experienced. And then, the worst thing happens to you. The very worst thing that could have happened. The thing you had nightmares about as a child, and you thought, it's all right, because that thing will happen to me when I'm older and wiser, and I'll have felt so many feelings by then, that this one worst feeling, the worst possible feeling, won't seem so terrible. But it happens to you when you're young. It happens when your brain isn't even fully done cooking, when you've barely experienced anything, really. The worst thing is one of the first big things that ever happens to you in your life. It happens to you, and it goes all the way down to the bottom of what you know how to feel, and it rips it open, and carves out this chasm down below to make room. And because you were so young, and because it was one of the first big things to happen in your life, you'll always carry it inside you. Every time something terrible happens to you from then on, it doesn't just stop at the bottom. It goes all the way down. So yeah, I really loved this. I do have another book by this author, One Last Stop, and I'm probably going to get to that pretty soon because I'm hoping I'll like it as much as I liked this one. So for anyone that doesn't know, basically this book is about the son of the President of the United States at the time and the youngest prince of England, and they sort of start off as like this. They don't like each other, and they get forced to be like with each other after a scandal for a little bit to kind of cover up the fact that they hate each other and like smooth things over. And then they realize that they actually do like each other as people, and they become friends. And they start like sort of sending emails back and forth, and then it kind of gets a bit more flirtatious. And then eventually they realize that they like each other, and their relationship is very sweet. It's very realistic, I'd say. I appreciated a lot of like the trauma that we saw them go through. This is something I don't think the film necessarily really did that well. Like, I think it showed Henry's trauma quite well with how he dealt with things, but I don't think it really showed Alex's trauma, which I think the book did beautifully, because he's this very confident, kind of charismatic kind of guy, but he goes through a lot in this book. I mean, both of them do, and you're kind of just really rooting for them and wanting them to be happy together, even though like their lives are kind of making that practically impossible for them. Didn't expect to like this. I'm apparently more of a romantic at heart than I thought, and I loved it. So yeah, definitely would recommend this one for sure. The final book I read this month was the last book in the Scholomance series by Naomi Novik, the Golden Enclaves. So I read the previous two books a few months ago, so it was a bit of a break before I finally got to this one. And yeah, I can't really say too much about it without spoiling things, because this is the last book in the series. It carries on directly after a cliffhanger that happens in the second book. And I don't think I liked this book as much as I liked the second one, I'd say. I think the first book was kind of like a middle 3 to low 4-star for me. The second book was a 4-star. This is a high 3, basically. Rounded up to a 4, but it's a high 3. I think I just found that the pacing was a little bit slow. It seemed to take a long time for anything to happen. Ultimately, the tone is just a lot more depressing, I think. I've always found it a series I have a good time with. Even though it deals with kind of dark things, it's got a lot of comedy to it, particularly with our main protagonist, Elle. Basically, the story is about this girl called Elle, who is prophesied to kind of be this dark sorceress. And she is at this really demented magical school where the school, like, essentially is trying to kill the students all the time with, like, monsters and demons and stuff. And there is this guy called Orion that keeps saving her. And she is infuriated by this. And then eventually she kind of gets to know him, and they sort of become friends. And I found their dynamic, like, really lovely. They tempered each other beautifully. Like, Orion is just kind of a bit dumb, but he's really sweet in the books. And I loved him and Elle's relationship. And we don't really see a lot of that in this book for very valid reasons. But I think it did just have an impact on the book. Like, we were mostly all centered around Elle. We saw some of the other characters, but they weren't in it enough, I don't think. And what happened with Orion in it was just very sad. And even though I did like the final conclusion for this book, I think the ride was just a lot harder to get through than the other books, and that's why I would rate it a little bit lower, because I just didn't have as good of a time with it. So I did enjoy where the story went. I didn't necessarily enjoy who was kind of like the main antagonist in it. There are parts of it that I felt was well done, and then parts that just really weren't. So yeah, overall, I still say I'd really like the series. I would definitely reread the series, and I do want to read more by Naomi Novik in the future, because I just think she's very imaginative and intelligent with her world building. I know some people have issues with her writing. I personally don't. I really enjoy it. I really enjoyed Elle as a protagonist. But yeah, that was my last book of the month. Okay, so before I go into what I'm going to be reading in October, I wanted to quickly show off some really cool merchandise that I picked up recently. I went to a local convention called Doki Doki, and there was some really cool artists there, and one of them I really loved, and I just wanted to share what that is. So it is by someone called Felfira Moon Designs. I will link below. But basically they do these like really cool, they do stickers as well, but they do like pin badges and stuff. And they're all kind of bookish themed, so I don't think you can see this one very well, so I'll probably put like a photo in or something of it. But basically this one says the never-ending TBR pile. And then they also do kind of like little like badges as like what kind of things you like to read. So I had to pick this one up which says I read spooky books. And yeah, they're just super cute and I kind of want to buy more from them, so go check them out. So, on to what I'm going to be reading in October. Of course, it's going to be spooky month, and as such, I'm going to be doing Becca and the Books Spookopalathon, or Spookopoly, as I'm just going to call it, which is essentially a board game based off Monopoly, which Becca and the Books has created, and you kind of like roll to pick your prompts for the month. So I'm just going to be rolling as I go. Let me just pick up the board now so you can have a quick look at it. Here is the board. I just kind of printed it off myself, but you can see that it's kind of got little like themes for all of the different things. It's very cool. So I'm going to be rolling on this for the month to decide what I'm going to be reading. I basically have so many different horror and spooky books, and I've not really got anything in particular I really want to get to this month, other than a couple of things that I will talk about at the end of the video. So I figured I may as well just let fate decide what I'm going to read for October. So I will show my first roll now. So with my first roll, I got They're Burning All the Witches, Even If You Aren't One. That is essentially to read a witchy book. I actually had a couple of different options for this. I had Slewfoot was one, but I decided to choose between these three in the end. So I've got This Coven Won't Break by Isabel Sterling, which is the sequel to These Witches Won't Burn that I read quite recently. I have The Witchery by S. Isabel. And then I finally have The X-Hex by Erin Sterling. So those were my three options, I think, for this. But I think I am probably going to go with This Coven Won't Break, because I am just really itching to get back to these characters. I read it not that long ago, the first book, and I don't want to leave it too long to get to this one in case I kind of forget the characters. So I think I'm going to start off the month with this book, which is going to be kind of like, it should be a fun little YA high school romantic fantasy, basically. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to that. So that'll be my first book of the month. I also have two other books that I probably am going to get to this month for sure. I have our book club book for the book club that I run. I run an LGBTQ plus fantasy book club, and I gave them a couple of votes basically to see what we were going to read for Halloween, and they picked Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. Essentially, this is about a trans boy who was on the run from a cult that raised him, and they have basically infected him with some kind of bioweapon, and he is trying to find people to help him essentially, and also avoid getting caught by the cult at the same time. Please look up the trigger warnings for this if it's something you're interested in. I've heard it gets very dark and very gruesome, so please do check trigger warnings if that is something that can upset you. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be reading this probably towards the end of the month. And then another book that I'm probably going to be reading on and off is It Came From the Closet, which is an anthology of essays based around queer reflections on horror movies. I'm a massive horror movie fan. I love them. So I'm really excited to kind of read these and check some of them out. So yeah, I will let you know what I think of that in the end of the month. I might not get to all of them purely because I haven't seen all the horror movies, but it also gives me an excuse to watch some more horror movies, which I will definitely be doing over October anyway. The last thing is that I'm going to be also working on a little project over October, which is very kind of seasonal, I suppose. So it's going to be my first sort of big video project for this channel. And for that, I am going to be rereading one of my old favourites series. And it basically just seemed like the perfect series to read over October anyway. So I am going to be reading the Worst Witch book series, which was an old series that I read back when I was quite young, and I loved it. It spawned like some TV series as well, and I don't think I've ever actually read like the last 2 books in it. I think they came out around the time that I sort of just stopped reading this series, but I'm really excited to kind of like give these another go now that I'm older and see if like it still kind of holds up, and see if I can like get back that kind of love that I had for this series. So yeah, I'm really excited to be doing that for a video soon. It will hopefully come out probably towards the end of October, maybe early November if my editing is a little slow. So that is my main plans for the month. I'm basically going to be rolling as I go with the Spookopoly to see what I'm going to read. I don't really want to pin myself down to like a solid I must read this amount of books this month. So I'm just going to basically read a book and then I'll roll and see what I get. So I will do a little vlog throughout the month of what I roll and what I think about the books. So that is pretty much it for this wrap up and for my TBR for October. I hope you all have a good month doing whatever you are doing this month. I love October so much. It is probably one of my favourite months, just because I get to do all the spooky things and watch all the spooky movies and stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited for this month. As always, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!